I wanted to share my sermon from up here today to physically manifest what we have learned in the past 2 months. Wait, now has it been 2 months? I actually had to count back on my calendar to see what it was, and we've been like this for 12 weeks, separated for 3 months, but it feels longer, like, what, a year? And you know what? Tomorrow is June, and I'm just getting used to it being April. So again, I wanted to share my message from up here to demonstrate what we've always known but never really had to practice. Church can happen anywhere. There's a popular saying, be the church, don't go to church. And 13 weeks ago, that's all it was. It was a slogan. But what have we discovered? Church can be anywhere. Church is what happens in our lives. Church is putting our actions in alignment with our faith convictions. We can be anywhere to practice love and compassion, forgiveness, patience, gentleness, bold acts of justice, generosity. Christianity is too little if it's only showing up on Sundays. Now, don't get me wrong, I need my church community. I need you. I need worship. It's what gets me back on track when I've lost a little of that patience and love, when compassion has grown thin. But there is more than one way to be church. If I asked you 13 weeks ago, is online church real? What would you have said? You may be watching right now and still have the same question. Is this real? I've been reading as many blogs and articles as I can and watching webinars about being a congregation that isn't meeting together in person. We adapted to this interruption as fast as we could. But few of us welcomed this disruption. No one welcomed this disruption until now. Until I realized God is somewhere in this doing a new thing. Until I realized this is our Pentecost. So let's recap where we've been. We started our separation from each other midway through Lent as Jesus and his followers were on the move toward their final confrontation in Jerusalem. And then Holy Week, where his followers denied, betrayed, and watched afar as he was unjustly tried, crucified, died on a cross, and was buried in a tomb. We were still separated on Easter when Jesus appeared to a group of women, and they told them that Jesus was alive. Disbelieving, the disciples locked themselves behind closed doors and hid, but still wondering, now what? Many of the disciples simply went back home, back to their routines, back to their fishing boats, back to normal. One day, Jesus met them on the beach where he had cooked fried fish for them, and he called them back together and prepared them for 40 more days until he left again. And then that's when, according to our Christian tradition, he ascended into heaven. Now what? 10 days later, they were back in Jerusalem with people from all over the known world for the Festival of Weeks, known in Greek as Pentecost. It was one of the 3 largest festivals, 50 days after Passover. People from everywhere were gathered together, like normal, like they had done as part of their tradition for hundreds of years. Afterwards, they would have gone home and gone back to normal. But the Spirit showed up. Unexpected, in wild and wonderful ways, in wind, in fire, in a miraculous moment when everyone heard what was being said in their own language, excitedly asking, now what? And that's when they left, filled with the Spirit. They didn't go back. They started gathering in groups and creating communities, which later, long story, became known as churches. And that's why today we say, Happy birthday! And ask, now what? I feel like I encountered that same Spirit on Thursday morning, May 14th. But for me, the Spirit is never very wild. I identify more with Elijah, who stood at the entrance to a cave, waiting for God to pass by. You may know this story. There was a great wind so strong it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And a quiet voice came to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" It was that kind of quietness of listening and writing notes during a webinar that I heard a question the presenter hadn't asked. It wasn't actually a question, it prompted questions. But what I heard the presenter say is, God is handing us something we cannot miss. Don't miss what God is handing us. To be clear, God isn't handing us a pandemic, but as Tony Morgan said, God is handing us an opportunity. He described the church as fortunate because under no other circumstance would the church as we know it, as we have known it to be our entire lives, under no other circumstance would we be so fortunate to come to a complete standstill, allowing us to question who we are and what being a church means. And in that moment, with that turn of phrase, I felt the Spirit. And ever since, I have never been as optimistic for the future of the church as I am right now, more optimistic, more energized. Again, I do not wish the devastating effects of this pandemic on anyone. The economic pain, the loss of life, this is not a good thing. But theologically, we always look for redemption. Not how can we dismiss our grief, not how can we minimize our loss, move on, forget what's going on in the world. But the Spirit asks, and asks you quietly, what are you doing to redeem this tragedy? In my humble opinion, too many churches are rushing back to their buildings, rushing back before the Spirit has arrived on Pentecost. They're focused on the question, what do we need to do so we can get back to being real church again? But that's the wrong question. Well, I don't want to judge it as wrong necessarily, but at least for me, the Spirit prompted a different question to change the narrative. Whenever it is that we return to in-person worship, how can we keep including people who've started worshiping with us in the past 12 weeks? We can't turn our back on them and walk away, say, oh, now we're going back to being real church. So what would that take? Never has the church been as accessible as we are right now. Laura Harris even said many times that through our midweek Zoom calls, she feels more connected to people in the church than ever before. This is a gift. People are reaching out to one another. Never have we had as much opportunity to innovate as we have right now. I mean, sure, we are missing a lot. We're missing physical human interactions, singing, cookies, and those marshmallow squares that Inez makes. But people may not realize that even if we started meeting next week, we wouldn't be able to hug. We wouldn't see each other's smiles behind our masks. Singing is dangerous, so until there's a vaccine, there's no congregational singing, no choir, and no lingering over coffee and marshmallow squares. It'll be in one door and out the other, staying 6 feet apart. That's kind of depressing. Frankly, our coming back to church too soon will be painful in a whole different way and induce a whole other level of grief and loss. So how can we change that narrative? Well, it's in the questions we ask. It's not in what we can't have, but what can we uniquely have now? What spirit-filled, redemptive opportunity have we been fortunate enough to have handed to us? So says the Lord, do not remember the former things or consider the things of old. I am about to do a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? I will make a new way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. So the governance team has decided we are not returning to in-person worship any sooner than the first Sunday after Labor Day. Maybe not then either, but at least, so we all know it, no sooner than then. But in the meantime, we're not going to just sit around waiting, because God is busy doing a new thing, so shall we. We are announcing the launch of Park Hill 2.0. It is our intention to become a fully local and digital church, which, as Art reminds me, means we would be a global church. We are not going back to just who we were. There was nothing wrong with it, but something more is springing forth. Do you not perceive it? We want anyone worshiping with us right now from around the country, even around the globe, to continue, but not just to watch. We want you to be fully engaged in the ministry of the church. Church can happen anywhere. So anyone who wishes to be included and involved can be so. We want that. That's our goal. Now, that has a lot of implications. There's a lot of questions to answer. I hope we ask the right questions, but our goal is to use the summer to prepare for the launch of Park Hill 2.0 on what would normally be our homecoming Sunday in September. It's going to take you helping to answer and ask lots of questions like, what does worship look like going forward if we include everyone, with people both in the sanctuary and online? What does it mean for faith formation with families and children, or music, or meetings with some people at the church and some people at home? What does it mean for membership, social justice, stewardship, staffing, recruiting volunteers? And what equipment do we need to complete that goal? And how are we going to pay for it? You know what? I can't answer these questions. We have to answer these questions. And so I invite you into this process of figuring it all out, listening to the Spirit. Will you say yes? Not to abandon who we were, not to leave anyone behind, but to be more, adding more love and compassion, and to include more. I invite you to say yes, to come aboard this new venture. Type "count me in the comments section. Say yes. Offer your ideas. Ask your questions. Offer your help. Send me emails. And realize how fortunate we are to have this opportunity handed to us to be more than we could have ever dreamed about or even imagined just 13 weeks ago. Say yes.
Do not remember the former things, or consider the things of old. I am about to do a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? I will make a new way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert.